and this year we've had the honor of speaking with Jasleen Kaur, valedictorian of class of 2021.
Hi, guys.
Okay, then. So, Jasleen, could you please explain your background?
Yeah, of course. So, my family is from Punjab, which is a state in northern India. Both of my parents are from Punjab, actually. My mom is from Chandigarh, which is a city, so she's a city girl. And my dad is from Panam, which is a very small village. I'm Sikh, and Sikhism is a monotheistic religion. It originated in the 1500s, and it originated in the Punjab region. And not that castes really have a big bearing in life today, but I'm a Sani, which means that my ancestors were small farmers and landowners. My dad's family was actually small farmers and landowners, and that's my background.
All right. Okay, so how was it like for you growing up Southeastern Asian American?
This is a great question. Really, this kind of is twofold. Growing up in America, I actually lived, before I came to Deer Park, I lived in a small village in Queens, and I went to a small private school. It was a Catholic school. I was one of two, I think, Southeast Asian kids in my grade. Actually, I think just one of two Asian kids in my grade. And I think you can take guesses for how well that went. Just growing up, I think I was constantly embarrassed by who I was as a person. If someone asked me, what's your religion, or where are you from, I would be the kid who would say, I was born here. What do you mean, where am I from? And that was because if I felt like saying I'm Sikh or I'm Indian or I'm Punjabi was like automatically isolating myself. It was some way to make myself different and just kind of on the outside of everyone. Not to mention all the stereotypes you hear growing up, being called a terrorist, that made me cry, stuff like that. It's just, it was not a fun time. And the result was I was afraid of who I was. I didn't speak about my favorite music or my favorite anything because I was just so afraid. Then I came here, and whatever you think of Deer Park, it's actually very diverse compared to Queens. And, I met people that were from Bangladesh or India or Pakistan or China or Nepal. And it was such an you connected with people. And I noticed that everyone here took pride in who they were as a person. And that kind of gave me the confidence to open up about who I was, what my family values were, what my culture is, what my religion is. And I think it kind of gave me the chance to sort of learn about myself and my connection to my culture and my religion. And so I'm really grateful for that.
That's amazing. So, what languages do you speak or understand?
This is my favorite question. So I speak Punjabi, which it's very, very informal language. I speak mostly like street style Punjabi. I can't write anything because it's in a completely different alphabet. But the really cool thing is that despite India having like 20,000 different languages, some of them are actually kind of similar. So my mom is perfectly fluent in Punjabi, Hindi, and Urdu. I'm not. I am very fluent in Punjabi, and I grew up watching Bollywood movies, so I understand Hindi, and Urdu is very close to Hindi, so I can understand that as well. But the cool thing about these languages is, I might meet someone who's from an entirely different part of India, and they'll be speaking to me in Hindi, and I'll just answer back in Punjabi, so we understand each other, and we could actually have a conversation, which I think is really cool.
That is super cool. So, how's it like balancing your culture in America?
So I'm gonna rip off Hassan Minhaj in this answer. In Patriot Actor, actually one of his shows, he talks about balancing your culture in American being like biryani. If you don't know what biryani is, it's amazing. I recommend you try it. And it's chicken and rice, and with the seasoning and spices, there's a lot of spices that go into it. So you'll usually get like whole like pepper or star anise, or like you'll get a curry leaf in there. And the thing with that is when you bite into one of those, it's like, ugh, what is this flavor? Like, that's so gross. And then you kind of push it aside. But the rest is amazing. So I think the cool thing about balancing your culture in America is you keep the good stuff and you kind of push away the bad stuff, right? And so what that means is there's so many aspects of my culture that I love, my language that I speak, the music that I listen to, the folk dance that I was taught. And those are things that I want to keep of my culture, and even my religion as well. Some aspects of it are so spiritual, and I really, really want to pass those down. And then there are some aspects of my culture, more so the societal ones when we're talking about gender roles and education, where it's like, it's our job to push the needle further and further. I think we of all people have the greatest sort of advantage to do that because, we grew up as Asians and we grew up as Americans. And it's just, you see the best of both worlds. And so why not we strive to make it the best of both worlds?
I think that's pretty relatable to anyone who's multicultural in America.
Yeah.
All right. So what are some of your favorite customs?
So I can name a few. There's a bunch of holidays we celebrate. Gurpurb, Diwali, Holi. Most of these are religious holidays. But I'm going to jump straight to weddings because I think Punjabi weddings are like the coolest thing ever. So if you don't know this, for most Southeast Asian weddings, they're like a week long. And I'm not exaggerating. There will be like 6 to 7 events. So, you have like all the pre-wedding traditions. So you have the maya, which is where you torture the bride or the groom by like rubbing them with, this sounds so weird, with like a turmeric paste. And then you have the jago, which is literally just a party to celebrate the marriage that hasn't happened yet. And the tradition of a jago is really cool. They would actually go around the village and they would be like, hey, there's a wedding, like don't stay asleep, like let's start celebrating right now. And then that's like all before the actual wedding itself. And then we have a reception. And if you've ever been to a Punjabi wedding, it's literally just an excuse to dance for 3 to 4 hours, like every night. And we get pretty hype on the dance floor, not gonna lie. And so I love weddings.
Right, then. To be honest, our weddings are kind of like that too. I think this is kind of like a Southeastern Asian.
Yeah, they're so much fun.
All right. So how diverse are Asians?
So that's a great question. I think most people should know this without me saying. Asians are incredibly, incredibly diverse. I just want to start off, I think I've already said this. In India alone, there are 20,000 languages or dialects that are spoken, and those are all like native. So they're Indian, like mother tongues in India. And that's just, we're talking about one country in Asia. Asia, it includes India, it includes our neighbors, Pakistan, which although there are some cultural similarities, it's an entirely different religion, the cuisine is very different, and that's just our neighbors. And then you think of Afghanistan, very, very different. China, Nepal, Japan, Asia is a very, very big continent, and we encompass a lot of different cultures, a lot of different countries, religions, languages. We're a very, very diverse group.
All right, then. So, how would you define the monominority myth, and how has it played a role in your own life?
I'm so glad this question has kind of been brought up because I think it's a really, really important one to talk about. So the mono-minority myth is a stereotype and this narrative that praises one racial or ethnic group for their economic, academic, cultural success in contrast to the perceived successes of other racial or ethnic groups. So in America, the mono-minority myth is designated to Asian Americans, and that's kind of where you hear the stereotypes of like Asian Americans are good at math, they're really smart, stuff like that. So there are multiple flaws with this myth. First, it fails to recognize the diversity of Asian Americans, and it's just factually incorrect. And what does that really mean? As I mentioned, we're a very, very diverse group of people. So this one blanket generalization for a group is really, really like damaging. Yeah, Asian Americans do have the highest median income, but that's one snapshot. Take a look at the whole group and you'll notice that we also have the highest income gap between the top 10% and the bottom. And so not only is this myth incorrect, but I think the greatest thing that we want to talk about when we're talking about the mono-minority myth is not just us as Asian Americans, but us as minorities. So the mono-minority myth is really created to drive a wedge between racial minority groups. And the myth says that Asian Americans have played within the rules of American system to their own benefit. And it's, you know, the success of some groups of Asian Americans, it's an example towards other groups. And it's kind of like what they should strive for. So really the problem with that is it's kind of like saying to other racial groups, hey, Asian Americans did perfectly fine. Why can't you? Right? And what it does is it discredits racism and discrimination completely. And this is really, really detrimental. This reminds me of Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime, where he starts off by talking about the colonization of South Africa. And they used divide and conquer. And that's the same concept that applies here. The idea of it is by putting people of color in competition with one another, they are so distracted by competing with each other that they no longer focus on striving together towards liberation for all. Racism, discrimination, racial struggles, they exist. And this model minority myth, it's not only meant to discredit them, but it's meant to like pin minorities against each other. And that's not something we should do. I think we really need to kind of learn more about other cultures and kind of put things like model minority myths aside, because if there's one group of people that should be supporting another minority in their fight for basic equality and rights, it should be other minorities that have been subjugated to racism and oppression. So that's kind of how I feel about that.
Not a lot of people really knows about the concept of minority, so I'm really happy that you're able to explain it so well. All right, so why is it important to have Asian History Month?
I'm really glad you asked this question. I mean, just to start off, right, Asia is home to half the world's population. So studying the culturally and historically diverse areas of Asia, it provides people with the opportunity to just discover new global perspectives and learn. And the importance of that is ignorance is our biggest issue today. Ignorance breeds fear, and fear breeds hate. And so if you don't already know what direction I'm going in, if you look at what's happening today, if you haven't been reading the news within the past year, thanks to COVID, hate crimes against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders has risen 150%. And that's kind of sparked the movement Stop Asian Hate. Now, the issue is that in America, there are so many stereotypes and there's so much ignorance that kind of festers. And that's where this hatred comes from, right? Growing up or in America, Asian Americans are subjugated. Either they're just completely invisible, they're not seen at all, or they fit into those stereotypes and those boxes of model minorities, right? So that individuality, that humanity, that human component is completely taken out of. Then when something like the COVID virus or the COVID pandemic happens, then it becomes, oh, Asians are the perpetual foreigners. They were never like a part of us. They go from being invisible to being the target. And this is really, really harmful. And that's why awareness is so important. Because if you don't understand a culture, if you don't care to learn about it, if you don't care to learn about the traditions, the values, and, you know, of a group of people, you're not going to respect them and you're going to be afraid of them. And that's going to cause hatred. And that's one of our biggest issues today. And so Asian History Month is just, it's a chance to get to learn about a group of people and to, you know, treat them as human and to just put your differences aside and realize that they're not much different from us. And that's going to change a lot of things.
Nice said. Now, final question. Who are your Asian American role models?
Okay. This is a question I always struggle with, but I'm going to say Philip Veracruz. And this is very, very relevant today. So Philip Veracruz was an influential labor organizer, and he was also a farm worker and a leader in the Asian American movement. He co-founded the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, which later merged with National Farm Workers Association to become United Farm Workers. Pretty much, he led the charge to improve the terrible working conditions for migrant workers, especially Filipino and Mexican farm workers. And this is really, really important because if you don't know this already, one of the largest protests in history is happening right under our noses, and that's the farmers' protest in India for very, very similar reasons. Current policies that were passed by the Indian government are really kind of abusing farmers in the Punjab region, and that's where, you know, my family's from. That's my background. And it really shows you that we're fighting for some of the same rights that we were fighting for years ago. And I just wanted to talk about this because I think this is something everyone should support and should learn about. And yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jasleen. I loved hearing your passion for your culture, of your knowledge, and the politics, of course.
I had to. Thank you for having me.
All right. Is there any last words you want to say?
Honestly, if you couldn't already figure, the moral of this interview is get educated. Go read something about, Asian hate crimes that are happening, farmers' protests, Asian awareness, our inventions, our successes, our role models. And you won't believe how far that will take you.